Welcome to the StarTrack podcast. I'm your host, Tom Hunter, and every week I'll be bringing you stories from some of Australia's best and brightest CFOs and the lessons they learnt along the way. My goal for the podcast is to provide learning and development opportunities for those wanting to get to the level of the guests on this show, but they just didn't have the access to those lessons otherwise. Let's get into it. On today's show, I'm joined by the CFO of Bulk Group, Paul Stevenage. Bulk's a global logistics and warehouse business with operations right across Australia. Paul's had an incredible career holding CFO roles at Woolworths and Retail Zoo. He gives fantastic advice on building a career in supply chain finance, navigating private equity, and understanding why the people behind the numbers matters just as much as the numbers themselves. I hope you enjoy it, so here we go. Paul Stevenage, welcome to the StarTrack podcast.
Thank you. Really great to be with you.
Awesome. How's things? How are you?
Oh, busy as ever. I think everything is flat out that I can do, which is great. But really busy, but great to be with you today, Tom.
Very good. I think last time we spoke, you were in Adelaide for Gather Round. How was that?
Yeah, well, Gather Round I hardly got to, but I had the opportunity to go to a great working capital conference, and they say cash is king, right? And so never had a chance to do that. So I was very pleased to be in Adelaide.
I don't think you missed that because I think it was pretty wet, wasn't it? In Adelaide that weekend? I think it was pretty wet.
It took me almost as long to get a taxi at Adelaide as it did to fly from Melbourne to Adelaide. But perhaps that's something we'll take up with the government in Adelaide.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I've already given the listeners a bit of an intro to yourself, but I can never do it justice. So it'd be good to hear from you, who you are, what you're doing at the minute, that type of thing.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm in an amazing role at the moment with a global logistics business called Bulk. And while it's not well known, we're represented with warehouses in every state in Australia. We've got a great transport network. We have wonderful blue chip customers like Kmart and Target and Bega. And we also do work for AGL. And we're also a global business. So with that, right at the moment, comes a bit of pressure, but we'll probably touch on that at a later point. But really exciting role. The business has been family owned for 15 years and the CEO has been in the business for 15 years. So It's great to be around company with people who have been in it and on it for quite some time.
Awesome. We'll come back to that and go into a bit of depth later on. But it'd be good to go back to the start because what was it about accounting? What was it about finance that drew you to the career?
Yeah, well, look, Dad was an accountant, and accountants do have an influence. But I enjoyed accounting at school. I wasn't so good at a lot of other stuff. I was hopeless at physics and chemistry and all those things, but maths and accounting, I really enjoyed. I topped the class. The only class I topped in was accounting. So I guess that the combination.
You did accounting at high school?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, okay, right. Interesting.
I guess that was a bit innovative back in those days and perhaps has dropped off the perch a little bit with schools these days. But it was the basics of accounting. I cut my teeth at high school on it.
Was it helpful coming into uni? Is first year accounting exactly like it is in high school?
Yeah, it was pretty. I sort of breezed through the first year and thought it was amazing. Got a bit tougher later. And of course, when you do your CPA, as I did, or your CA, you sort of, the rubber hits the road a bit there. But I will say in the first year it was good. Yeah,
nice. And then sort of naturally went through to your first accounting role post-uni?
Yeah, look, I worked at the Arnott's biscuit factory in Fremantle in Western Australia, and I could smell the biscuits being cooked in the morning and got my free Tim Tams during the day. That was an amazing
nice.
My career. It didn't last throughout my career, unfortunately, but it did. It did there.
Yeah. What was the first role like?
It was great. Look, I was an assistant accountant. I was studying at uni in my final year. A big tip to a lot of your listeners that I think if you can do that, it does help you when you're competing for that main first role after you're fully qualified. Look, you don't have to do that, but I will say it did put me ahead in that first role.
In what way? What specifically put you ahead?
I think you're more practical. You're just finishing your degree and you're matching that up with actually being in the workforce. And I think that enables you to appreciate why you're important to a business, why they care about results, why they care about accuracy,
Yeah.
And you start to learn how important the balance sheet is, as well as the P&L, right?
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
think at uni you tend to focus on a profit and loss, but it's really important to get behind your balance sheet. And I certainly did that in my first year for sure.
Yeah, nice. And then when did the Boral role come up?
Yeah, a little later. Look, what an amazing business, right? And gone through a fantastic journey. But in Western Australia, I had the chance also to work for Len Buckridge and the Buckridge Group of companies prior to joining Boral, which gave me
Right.
a
Okay.
residential home background.
Yeah, okay.
But then I found myself in the plasterboard business of Boral Limited,
Okay. Right.
Western Australia, and I'd be out the back with my sleeves rolled up, with plasterboard dust going around the joint,
Yeah.
learning about manufacturing. But I think the key takeout there, and of course it continued through my time at Boral, that getting involved in a vertically integrated business is really good. So that business basically digs the raw materials out of the ground and it
Mm.
retails it, right, as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think that was, Boral's a great business to work for, that's for sure.
What was the business like at the point when you were there?
It was so that was the plasterboard business in Western Australia, and
Yeah.
Boral Plasterboard was a significant part of that business. Uh,
Yeah.
but later, I did move to Melbourne
Okay.
as I did a consolidation of the back office, and actually, just about made myself redundant. In fact, I did. I was
Yeah.
thinking that I would be looking for a new role, but the CFO at the time decided I'd be good enough in Melbourne. So,
Yeah. Okay.
the same gropers can make it over to Melbourne and be successful for all those who are in Western Australia. And was lucky enough to come to Melbourne.
Yeah, nice. And then so when did that finish up? I think you went to Woolies afterwards.
Yeah, so I did a good 6 year stint. I started in Perth. I went
Mm.
to Melbourne. I ended up in the Boral corporate office at Bridge
Okay.
Street in Sydney.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
With Rod Pierce. I was pretty young at the time, and I got thrust into weekly catch-ups with the MD, and I was appointed uh, head of the construction materials business, right, which is the heart of Boral,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that was a corporate role. So I went from had people, from a team reporting into me to really being in a corporate office. But you know what? I certainly learned about the pressure that is brought to bear on CEOs, and I think that was a great thing for me. But yeah, I did 7 years there, and then moved to Woolworths Limited.
Yeah. Right. So were you at Boral when the housing
Yes.
0809? So
Yeah.
what was that like going through
Yeah.
that period?
Look, the GFC, and look, isn't there some learnings from that both in COVID and of
Yeah.
course now with the Iranian situation happening in the Middle East? I think 2008. In fact, I remember getting snapped down at the local financial institution down the road as I was looking up at the shares dropping dramatically, right? But a big thing and of course, we all recovered from that, which I guess
Yeah.
is one of the lessons. But Boral was the largest brick manufacturer in the US at that time,
Okay. Yeah. Right.
which sounds enormous, but of course, the Americans don't build that many houses with bricks if you've been over there. So perhaps not
Yeah.
as big as it sounds, but it did have a big negative impact on that business. And it was about that time that I was lucky enough to get approached by Woolworths Limited.
Yeah. Nice. So what was Woolies building towards at the time?
Wow, what a massive multi-billion-dollar investment in supply chain.
Yeah. Okay.
And again, if you get the opportunity to get into supply chain, perhaps not the sexiest part of anybody's life
Yeah. Yeah.
as an accountant, although I would argue against that. Look, it's on the record that Woolworths invested a huge amount in consolidating their distribution facilities from probably 25 down to about 8. They consolidated their transport network, which was amazing. One minute you saw all the Arnott's Biscuits trucks on the road, and the next minute you didn't. And the reason is because they had worked with organisations like Woolworths to consolidate supply chain. And the
Yep.
building of automated DCs, right, which you can see overseas at the moment, but Australia has some of the best automated DCs, and they sit in the Woolworths network. So I was head of finance for supply
Okay.
chain,
Yep.
and later the CFO of the logistics division.
Yeah, right. Okay. So that was your first CFO role?
Yeah, that when I moved to the logistics division, having been a part of what was called Project Refresh then,
Okay.
I had
What's that project refresh stand?
sorry.
What was the refresh stand?
Yeah, yeah, they called it Project Refresh, which was the
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
entire structural
Yeah, yeah.
work, but which was originally called Project Mercury back in those days. I'll have to find out why they called it Mercury. There would have been a reason. But,
Gotta call it something.
but look, I worked with Tom Pocket. I'd rate him as one of the best corporate CFOs
Okay. Yeah, right.
that I have worked with. Just an amazing guy.
What was so good about what he did?
Oh, look, I think he was, well, very in touch with
Mm.
the organisation. He interviewed me for the role, right? And I expected, that someone much lower than him would come and bother
Sure.
to interview me at the time. But
Did,
it did
did
show,
you know of him when
not
he's
at
came into
all,
the interview? Yeah. Okay.
not
Yeah.
really, but I knew who the name of the CFO
Okay. Yeah.
in what you'd call my normal research that we all do.
Sure.
You're
Yeah.
not thinking that it would be Tom that would come in.
Yeah.
But of course, that really did demonstrate, and I think, I've tried to carry that on in my CFO life, that I
Mm.
get involved in recruitment, I get involved with the people that work in my area, right? No matter who they are, right?
Yeah.
Because everybody is on a journey and they all play an important part in the team. So I've tried to carry that sentiment through, and Tom taught me that when I joined Woolworths Limited.
Yeah. So, anything specific about his demeanor and approach outside of the recruitment component?
Calm, humble, very
Yeah.
educated, at the forefront of driving funding for that organisation, which has also been a part of my career.
Yeah.
And we mentioned cash at the beginning. I think
Mm.
one of the things that Tom focused in on was cash.
Mm.
And you would think that perhaps that wasn't necessarily the highest thing on your agenda, but if you're raising billions of dollars for investment, then absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you said that you were leading the supply chain investment at the time.
Yeah.
So because that would have been one of the larger projects you'd worked on to that point, right?
Absolutely. That took me into the heart of DC land, if you call it that, and those automated DCs. It
Yeah.
took me to presenting the business cases in front of Michael Luscombe, the
Mm.
CEO, and Tom Pocket. And I had a very, well, for me then, it was a team of over 40.
Okay.
And that was the largest team that I'd had, all supply chain focus,
Yeah. Wow.
all working hard for that business. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you'd said earlier about that role being the first time you had real responsibility and accountability. Was that right?
Yeah, I think you realise as a finance leader that while you absolutely have to deliver on the integrity of the numbers you're putting forward, you
Mm.
actually also have to remember that there are people behind the numbers, right?
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
really- I wouldn't have got anywhere without some amazing people working for me.
Yeah.
And I think that was the role where I really, started to understand the importance of that. And, you can get into that bean counter model of thinking. And I think,
Yeah.
you can get out of it. It's good.
There must have been a few challenges or times you got it wrong during then.
Oh, yes. I mean, you learn from your mistakes, right?
Yeah.
Don't make the same one twice. That'd be
Yeah.
yeah. But
Yeah.
but I've made many, absolutely. And I think the lesson out of some of those mistakes would be reread what you do and what you're
Yeah.
presenting. In
Okay.
this day and age with AI and delivering fast and quick, I'm not suggesting you shouldn't be pushing timelines and deadlines. You have to in finance, but
Mhm.
that second read, that second look at what you're presenting is probably the most important. And if I could focus in on where I've made a mistake, it was being too quick, too fast, and
Yeah.
getting caught out. That'd be the lesson, I'd say.
I think that's relevant for anything, isn't
Yeah.
it?
So, yeah.
And so then the StarTrack role wasn't long after that. How was that?
Yeah, well, I did have the great opportunity to work with Richard Umbers at Woolworths Limited, and
Yeah, right.
he moved to Australia to the logistics space, and I got the chance to work with him, and again, supply chain, but a real chunky CFO role with I had, I think I had 150 in Melbourne and 150 in Sydney, looking after the shared service function as well as that. That combination of StarTrack and Australia Post was merged together. So a great opportunity for me to see a buyout. It was over $500 million buyout
Yeah.
that Australia did of the second half of StarTrack from Qantas.
Okay.
And then I was lucky enough to spend. Well, I say lucky enough. When you do an acquisition, and those listening will know that synergy is the big word, right? You've got to deliver on that multiple
Yeah.
that you just paid, or probably your CEO just paid.
Yeah.
And so I spent the following year working on ways to get efficiency. And some may say to me, they've challenged me, does that mean you just have to get rid of people? And the answer was, it was all about procurement savings. It was all about when you merge an organization together, making sure that you're getting best bang for your buck from your suppliers. And when an organization merges like that, I spent a lot of time doing that. I was lucky enough to work with Richard, who was really 2IC in that organisation. Of course, later became managing director at Myer, and now resides in New Zealand, a great part of the world. I wish he was back here in Australia, but he loves it over there.
Yeah.
But yeah, great opportunity for me again.
And so for that acquisition with StarTrack, what did the business change from and to in terms of headcount and size and all the rest of that?
Yeah, look, we went after some pretty significant savings, but key here was it was a B2B bolt-in to Post. And so what that meant is that you were getting synergies operationally, right? You were getting, you were utilizing existing capacity, which is really important. And when you look for synergy benefits, people do go to, how many people will we get out of this combination? But in that instance, I mentioned procurement, but it was also about filling the trucks. As simple as not having those trucks half full or not getting the backloads, which often happens between Melbourne and Sydney in this great country of ours. A lot of trucks go up from Melbourne to Sydney and they come back half full or even sometimes empty. But obviously, if you can be a part of an organisation that has to move goods or in this case, parcels between those two states, and you get the synergies, and that was certainly the case in that situation.
And what did that change your headcount from once the acquisition came through?
Yeah, we probably took 20% of the headcount out by rationalising the back office and look, I had some of the challenges in that was not to be Melbourne biased, but just because I was in Melbourne, I have to say that there was some real standouts in the StarTrack team who were Sydney based because StarTrack originated in Sydney, not in Melbourne, and. Again, a great challenge to be objective, right? And not necessarily favour the ones that are just around you, but to be as objective as you possibly can.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. And then, so when did the role the Coles position come up following that?
Yeah. So Richard went off to be MD at Myer, and look, there was some discussion about whether potentially the parcels business might get floated, and a little public discussion around that. Of course, that didn't happen. Amazing growth, though, of course, in the parcels business. But Richard left for Myer, and Coles, who were just down the road, of course, in Toorak Road in their head office here in Melbourne, were keen for me to join, and given my supply chain background at Woolworths Limited, they convinced me to move. And I know some people joke with me that I was a bit of a traitor, going from Woolworths to Coles. And there are other organisations out there that compete with each other. Now, what I would say is that there is absolutely nothing wrong with doing that as a finance professional. Obviously, you have to make sure you don't cross the line with conflicts of interest and things like that. But as long as you do that professionally, definitely do it. Keeps your employer honest as well if you're good at what you do. I was very happy to go there.
Any major differences between the two businesses as a whole, corporate?
Well, yes, I think there's no doubt that Woolworths had invested in supply chain a lot earlier, and so they were reaping the benefits financially of that, and probably even to this day, that is the big differentiator in my view between Woolworths and Coles. I think, Coles, for me, was fantastic because I got into areas that I hadn't before, like their Flybuys business, which is an amazing loyalty scheme. Probably still the best in Australia. And I got also the opportunity, obviously, to work in supply chain. I headed up the IT area from a finance perspective. And I also got to work with Andy Coleman, who was head of operations. And if you know the supermarkets business, it's basically broken down into the buyers and supermarkets who go and buy product, and ops, which is really all of the labour and the operations. And I always used to say to my merchandise friends that ops was where it mattered, and it was also the toughest part of the business. And it was. But Andy, who now is in the UK, was an amazing leader of ops in supermarkets, and gave me the flexibility to go where I wanted. So I actually had a bit of fun at Coles. And Coles, you asked me about the culture, they allowed you to do that. And I think that's a great thing about Coles Limited. If I were to point to a difference, I would say that Woolworths, had built a great culture around growth and invested in projects. So the teams in Woolworths Limited were very close, and I think that was a big takeout for me at Woolworths, and I obviously enjoyed that very much.
Quick one before we get back to it. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably already know that I recruit for senior finance professionals for high growth businesses. That's what I do outside of this show. My approach is built around storytelling. When I take on a search, I build a narrative around the business, who they are, what they're building, where they're going, and why that role matters. Before I reach out to a single candidate, I tell that story across multiple channels to my network of over 28,000 finance professionals in Australia, so that when I do start conversations, candidates already know who you are and there's a level of buy-in before I even contact them. So if you're a founder, CEO, or CFO that's thinking about a finance hire, even if it's early days, I'm always happy to chat. Whether that's a question, some free advice, or a sense check on what the market looks like. You can find me on LinkedIn or at storyrecruitment.com.au. All right, let's get back into it. I think you were saying earlier about the pace at Coles was quite a surprise for you.
Yeah, it is. I mean, Monday morning, you're in at 6 a.m. at Coles Limited if you're in either an ops or supermarkets role, because by 11 o'clock, the MD's briefed on the results, the comp sales position for the week just gone. And from a stock perspective, the game, I mean, obviously they trade market share on discounts, but the other thing is you're in stock position, right? And it's very fast-paced at Coles. They work quickly in order to get on top of their numbers, and that was definitely a highlight when I was in that business.
How does the pace there compare to other businesses or more smaller businesses that you've been involved with since?
Yeah, nothing like that. I will tell you now. Although, subsequently I did move to Retail Zoo, and we'll chat about that. There it was about my pace as opposed to the business's pace. Not that a smaller business, and that was still a medium to large business in Australia, very well
Yeah.
known with its brands. But there, it was about how much pace I set, whereas at Coles Limited, you got on the treadmill and basically you ran as fast as it was going.
That's kind of interesting because you always hear about like so moving to startup land. Let's say someone coming from a big business, a lot of companies say, "Oh, they're not going to be prepared for the pace it like a smaller, fast-moving business."
Yeah.
So, what? How do you think it got to that point where it is such a fast-paced business at that scale?
I think the demands on people to deliver through cycles where you've got a major competitor is really, really the driver of it.
Mm.
Um, the share price of both, of course, Coles, formerly Wesfarmers, owned and demerged later.
Mm.
You can imagine, uh, you know, through the original acquisition, Wesfarmers were very keen to get a substantive return out of that business.
Yeah.
And so, I guess the fast pacedness of it has its origins from that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And you were saying about Retail Zoo before, so where did that role come up for you?
Well, I hadn't done any private equity, and it's a business that it's known for its brands, Boost Juice, and of course,
Mm.
later Betty's Burgers, which was an acquisition I was lucky enough to do for Retail Zoo,
Mm.
and it owned by Bain Capital, and that ended up by being a 7-year stint for me from way to go, but. Uh, while I've said to you that supply chain from an industry perspective is
Mm.
something that I've enjoyed the most, from a finance perspective, working for private equity was without doubt pivotal in my career. I had the great chance to work with David Odgers, who was at Bain Capital, who's now moved into his own private equity business. And Rachel Yap is now based in London. She's an MD with Bain Capital. They were all a bit younger, as I was then, but had the chance to learn about how private equity works and a different kind of pace, but still a very fast pace.
Yeah.
And hugely important, of course, people will know that money on money, or mum, as it is more frequently known,
Sure.
is all that matters for private equity in some respects. But I would say that Bain Capital were a business that allowed the executive to run it. And it's certainly a compliment to Bain Capital that they did that, because I think the moment private equity tries to completely run a business, I think it becomes a problem.
Yeah. Okay. So what do you think getting into a private equity environment did for your career at that point? Like, what was the main draw card?
Well, the draw card was obviously you potentially get involved in having a final equity outcome, and
Yeah.
money matters, hey?
Yeah. No, that's fair.
Yes.
Good as any.
And I've never been afraid to say to everybody that one of the reasons I got into private equity was for money. Don't
Yep.
be afraid to say that. But it comes with a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
I know I saw the sun come up a couple of times in the Chadstone office there, where Retail Zoo was based.
Yeah.
The office desks are there now, but nonetheless, we were there. And so you learn about that. You learn the highs and the lows. We had quite a few IPO attempts and trade attempts.
Yep.
And we sort of almost rung the bell a couple of times, and
Yeah.
it's been anywhere near an IPO and a simultaneous trade sale with vendor due diligence going on at the same time will know that it's hard yards, but hell do you learn a lot. You really learn. Yeah.
So are you running the sale process and the IPO process at the same time?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Is there any overlap there, or is it just two separate?
I know there is. You sort of have to have a dual personality. You literally have to remember which side you're playing on.
Yeah.
Obviously, the IPO is significantly intense. Investor relations meetings, I think I would have done close to 200 in my time now. But
Wow.
and look, it sounds exciting. We went to Hong Kong and to Auckland on one of those investor relation roadshows. But I will tell you, we literally flew into Hong Kong and flew back and then presented in Sydney. And I think a shower in between was about all I had between presentations. So
Yeah.
while it does sound exciting, it does come with its downfalls too.
Yeah. So, given you've gone through 200 of them, what are some big takeaways or must dos
Yeah.
for a successful investor relations meeting or presentation?
Look, know your business. You will get screwed when the doors are shut and the bankers are outside. And we had Goldman Sachs and Citibank and UBS,
Yeah.
I worked with some great people there. Of course, learnt a bit. But what I would say is, when the doors are shut, know your business, know where it's growing. In private equity, you're selling, right? So it's all about a platform for growth. So you're not just focused on how the current performance of the business, which a lot of CFOs would be focused in on. You're also focused in on what it can be in the future, and you will get scrutinized on that.
Okay.
The moment you start sort of glossing it up and making that to be more than it is, those investors will cut you up and eat you for breakfast. So I learned that pretty early on. But, Retail Zoo was an amazing business. It was, and it still is, of course, owned by American Capital. It's a standout. And while I, needed to make sure I understood the business, it helped that it was growing. And, of course, Betty's Burgers was born in the Retail Zoo business. It had 8 restaurants. I bought it from a great guy called David Hales, who lives in a wonderful place called Noosa. I wish I could live there, but there you go, never mind. But he sold the business to Retail Zoo. We took it to nearly 60 restaurants, I think, before the sale. And for those of you that love a burger every now and again, definitely advocate going there.
Yeah, for sure. So you say three IPO attempts that didn't go through. How do you get yourself up for the second or the third?
Yeah, look, it's hard. I will say it's hard. I think you've got to really, truly believe in what you do and the business that you're in. Because while I mentioned money was important and it does drive you an outcome, if you fall off the perch 3 times, getting back up, money that hasn't eventuated doesn't always make you feel better. And I think it does come back to that people piece, right? I was, really lucky, a great CEO at Retail Zoo, a great finance team. I had about 30 in that team. And if anything, they picked me up. Right? Their commitment to doing a great job, they made me feel good. And so it wasn't hard to come back and have another crack, because I knew at the end of the day we would get there. I always believed that we would. And of course we did. So at least that was confidence well thought through.
So how was that? What was the relief like? Paint the picture for me when it actually got through.
Yeah, look, enormous to think that that the owners got their outcome, and others did too. And I think importantly, look, it jettisoned me into going and working for KKR, who are the second largest private equity player in the world. That happened at the same time. It was a choice for me to be made. And I think we all make choices in our careers, right? Again, nothing wrong with that. I'd done 7 years at Retail Zoo. So I think, it gave me also my next opportunity, which I'm grateful.
Nice. And then so leading into that, then the KKR role. So that was in Sydney as well.
Yeah. So I had to do the trip to Sydney. I stayed in Melbourne and did the trip to Sydney every week. More or less that meant getting on the 6 a.m. out of Tullamarine
Monday morning,
and just so that I could be in the office by about 8:15, 8:20, or maybe even later if those planes didn't run on time. Which actually meant that I arrived quite a bit sooner than some of my colleagues, despite the fact that they lived down the road in North Sydney. So that was always a bit of fun, but tough. And then flying back on a Thursday night generally.
Wow.
Not easy,
And so how long were you doing that for?
I did it well over a year.
Right.
Well
Wow.
over a year, yeah. And
How was that emotionally and mentally? How did you manage that?
well, I think the key is routine, right?
Mm,
You and God, I guess this sounds a bit funny, but even to the point of packing your suitcase and making sure, or your carry on, whatever it is, and
yeah.
do it right. Although packing your suitcase became interesting later in my career, which I'm sure we'll touch on in a moment. But just the same flight, the same routine matters. It's tiring, and the only way is to become as efficient as you can at
Mm,
doing that. And
yeah.
so I learned quickly to do that.
Yeah.
I also had a small team in the UK, in London, and also one business analyst in Toronto, in Canada. So it was a
Okay.
little bit of overseas travel as well.
Right.
And so I can remember, deep in winter in Australia, having to do the long haul flights between both London and Toronto back into Melbourne. I think Sunday night and then Monday morning back out from Melbourne to Sydney. So it was hard. It was
Yeah.
hard. But nonetheless, I think the takeout is get your routine right. Get your routine
Yeah.
right, and it's not too bad.
And so, how does that affect your performance where you are so tired, stressed, having to travel so much? Like, it can't be fantastic from a personal perspective either.
Yeah, it's tough family wise. You've got to balance that. Melbourne makes great coffee, Tom. And so I think I became a coffee drinker during that time.
Yeah.
Not that I guess necessarily the lounges of the airports provide the best coffee, but I would say Brunessi at Melbourne Airport became the
Well known for you. Yeah.
yes, that's a call out for
First name basis in the end.
yeah, that's right. And so I learned how good the coffee is in Melbourne as well.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Nice. And then so that finished up. Was the commute too much, or was it?
Yeah, look, I was the CFO of their laser clinics business.
Mm,
So they predominantly are into hair removal,
okay.
not eye laser clinics, but sometimes people, and Botox, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
They've got a big Botox business. So hair removal, well, that wasn't anything that I could take advantage of because I've lost most of my hair. So there you go. But
Yeah.
but nonetheless, that business was certainly a way off from an exit at
Mm,
that time.
okay.
So committing to doing that sort of travel
Yeah.
became an issue for me. And again, I don't think it hurts. I'd done, I think I mentioned 3 gigs at 6+ years. Um, I did worry about leaving a business quickly. I think
Okay.
later in your career, you can do that a couple of times, especially if you're well pedigreed. I wouldn't advise people doing it early on in their career. I
Yeah.
think there is a tendency these days for you to look for that next move really quickly. I think if you can do 3 or 4 years in a role as a minimum, it's important. But later,
Yeah.
I think it's okay. But yes, I did decide to come back to Melbourne.
Yeah. And then so that's when the July role came up.
Yes, and very excited to do a 1 year contract with them. Part owned by Lachlan Murdoch, but of course the founders, well known in Melbourne, Rich and Eighth, and they had given birth to the July luggage business, a major hit, of course, online overseas in the USA. And then eventually attracted Lachlan Murdoch to invest, who does invest in businesses in Australia, which is not well known to many.
Yeah. Right.
And I spent a year really strategically drawing on all my experience that I'd had in the past to get them set for their future. Um, and um, and of course they continue to do great guns.
Yeah. Blowing up at the minute.
Yeah.
And so, what would that role specifically? What were you brought in to do?
Really, look, give them a strategic plan, an exit profile, meet with investors,
Yeah.
um, sort of give guidance to the finance team who were growing. It was a real, I actually enjoyed it because I was able to give back to others who were in a smaller business. So never
Yeah.
be afraid to go from a bigger business to a smaller business. during a career. I think it's good to do both,
Mm,
but I think there's a lot to be taken from doing that. And never be
mm,
afraid to take up a 1 year gig as well. I think that you learn a lot in sort of a role where you know there's a beginning and an end, as
mm.
opposed to necessarily there being a beginning and not really knowing when you're going to
Yeah, yeah,
do that once in your career. I think it's a good thing to do.
yeah,
Um, and for all those that are on contracts and do contract work, you do an amazing job, right? You have to be agile. You have to work with people that you don't necessarily have relationships with. So I'd
yeah.
say definitely give that a go in your career.
So you're saying just before getting them exit ready. So what does that mean specifically? Like, what does good look like for exit ready?
Well, it means what's called your IM or your information memorandum has got to be in good shape. It's got to
Yeah.
reflect the business. It's got to, as well as being a sales document, it's got to show the depth and the opportunity for growth, right?
Mm,
Now, in retail, right, that can be the expansion of the retail network. July, of course, is now expanded, and you can see it in some of our major shopping centres. It's about explaining why that matters. How does it compete versus the online business, right? Why does retail matter? And how do you stitch up a business, in a presentation that's also, got a significant online presence overseas? And where
yeah,
does that take you risks, right? And
yeah,
identifying where the risks are in the business, and that's really key, right? If I'm using my hard-earned cash to buy a business, um, I want to know where the risk is, right?
mm,
And I want someone to talk to me about how you overcome that risk. And so that's the sort of thing that I worked through in that role.
yeah. Okay, yeah, cool. And then so when did the bulk roll come up?
Well, I was finishing my time at July, and
Mm,
probably at that point where I thought, I'd like to do what I really like doing, right? And I will say that probably most of us don't always get to choose where we work. We don't get to choose our relatives, is the phrase. But I say we don't always get to choose who we work for, right?
yeah,
Supply and demand can bring you together. And so I wanted to work in supply chain. I wanted to work for a family owned business or a business that in a few years might do an exit or might be ready
okay,
to do an exit, but that I could really add value to. So both my private equity experience, my retail experience is important for a supply chain business because the back end of retail matters for a supply chain business. And in fact, one of our biggest customers, Kmart, obviously in the forefront of retail in Australia, matters to us. So combining all of that in a business, in Melbourne, while I love Sydney and Sydney's a great place to work, and I wouldn't discount ever going back to Sydney, mind you, but nonetheless,
yeah,
chance to stay in Melbourne. And so all those three things came together with this business headed up by Josh Wilson, who's owned it since its beginning, and Lachlan Tyndall, who also a part owner and been with the business all that time. And so all the, as they say, the stars aligned for me, and I joined them over a year ago now.
yeah. Okay. And so what was the business like? What position was it in when you joined? Like, what was the mandate when you were coming in?
Well, the mandate was obviously growth.
Yeah,
This business, there's been quite a bit of consolidation in the supply chain industry across the
yeah,
country. And having worked with great organisations like PwC, for example, would be one that I would call out,
mm,
who have done lots of research in this space. I was able to bring, that sort of experience to the table for them to start thinking about what the future looked like.
mm,
And of course, with my old banking friends in Phillip Street, I was able to bring a connection there, which is really important for a business that's looking to grow.
yeah,
And as well as that, mergers and acquisitions, especially in a consolidating interest, are always on the radar. So,
mm,
having done a few in the past as well, particularly the Betty's Burgers acquisition that I mentioned,
yeah,
all of those things have been very important for bulk transport. and they have a global business as well. So my experience overseas has helped a little too. So all in all, they talk about that phrase, a perfect storm. Well, I'd say it was a perfect role, Tom, because I really enjoy what I do here at the Bulk Group.
So where's business tracking? Where do you see the next 12, 18 months?
Yeah, well, right in the middle of a major fuel crisis. I've been watching the Brent crude oil price daily, hourly, in fact, probably, because obviously fuel is an important element of transport. And so I've had to manage that with all of our carriers and our suppliers, and we're still on that journey, right? I'm still, I'm always a half glass full sort of guy, and I think you have to be. And nothing changes in this regard too. Obviously, we're a bit way through it now. People are starting to see probably the light at the end of the tunnel, but I'm still very confident that will happen. In fact, I would predict a bit of an oversupply with fuel at some time in the near future. I mean, it's not like economic activity doubled overnight, but of course fuel prices did, right? Which means I would say that there's going to have to be a bit of a correction. Now, a lot of people sit on the fence with their predictions, and I get that, right? Like, you don't want to be caught out with outlandish predictions. But I always say to finance people, don't be afraid to be a little bit on the edge. Don't be afraid to call it the way you see it. And I definitely would say that we will see a return back to fuel prices that we saw pre the crisis, if not lower. Maybe not for long, though. There will be an economic balancer, but nonetheless, something to watch out for.
Yeah, cool. Something to look forward to.
I know filling up at the bars at a much cheaper price would be good, but of course, a little bit to go yet on that. I don't claim to have any inside information on what's happening in that space.
For the business specifically, where do you see things tracking for Bulk Group over the next 12 to 18 months?
Well, enormously well. I'm very proud to represent this business when I sit in front of those that are interested in it. It really prides itself in dealing with its carriers professionally. It pays on time. It's got a 15-year history in this space. And I would say at the end of the day, it is one of the most respected transport warehousing businesses in the country. And it continues to grow. It continues to win blue chip customers, but it also continues to look after the smaller guys and make sure that where this business started, that it doesn't forget. I think one of the things Josh Wilson would say, the major owner of the business, is don't forget where you came from, right? And he continues to hold that close. And so when you combine all of those things, and a brilliant CFO, of course, no, I'm just joking, but on a more serious note, a very strong management team, very strong management team. And Lachlan Tyndall, I would say, he's still young, he's under 40, and I think he's a great tip for a great CEO long term in this country. He's amazingly led this business, and so I can only see things getting better and better here at Bulk.
Yeah, great. Well, it's good point to finish up there, but I've really enjoyed your time, Paul. I think your approach to resilience and building businesses has been great, and I think a lot of the listeners would agree and get a lot of value out of it, so I really do appreciate your time.
Oh, and thank you, and what an amazing job you're doing. I definitely encourage everyone to listen. I know that it's becoming very common for people to tell me they're listening to you. So obviously,
is it? Okay, well, that's good to know. That's very good. Well, if any of the listeners have any questions and want to reach out, is that something you're open to?
Absolutely. Always happy to do that.
Where would be best to get you?
They can certainly get me on my direct on my email and LinkedIn. Connect with me on LinkedIn, and we can take it from there.
Perfect. Well, thanks again for coming on the show, Paul.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks, Tom.
See you soon.
Thanks for listening to the CFO Track. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with a friend. I'll see you next time.